Sarah Mitchell was, by most accounts, a woman who had made it. At 42, she lived in a tastefully decorated two-story house in the quiet suburbs of Portland, Oregon. The lawn was always perfectly trimmed, the flower beds bloomed in neat seasonal rotations, and the kitchen smelled faintly of fresh coffee each morning. To neighbors and acquaintances, she was the image of stability, a responsible mother, a dedicated employee, and a devoted wife. Every morning at exactly 6:15 a.m., Sarah's alarm would go off, playing the same soft piano melody she had chosen years ago, back when she thought waking up peacefully would set the tone for the day. But lately, she had started hitting the snooze button more than once, letting the melody loop and fade, as if delaying her return to the life she no longer found exciting. Her days followed a predictable script: wake up, prepare breakfast for her husband Mark and their teenage son Ethan, commute 35 minutes to the downtown office of a mid-sized insurance company, work from 9 to 5 handling claims and customer files, and then come home to dinner, chores, and an hour or two of television before bed. It wasn't a bad life. There was no cruelty, no poverty, no chaos. But deep inside, Sarah felt something gnawing at her. She often compared her life to a bird in a gilded cage. The cage was safe, comfortable, even beautiful. But it was still a cage. The office routine. Sarah's desk at the office was immaculate, her pens arranged in a row, her computer screen free of sticky notes or clutter. Her colleagues liked her. She was dependable, polite, and efficient. But while others sometimes broke the monotony with laughter or small talk, Sarah kept herself on a tight leash. She remembered the early years of her career, when she believed she would rise quickly through the ranks, maybe even manage a creative department someday. Back then, she thought she was just paying her dues before moving on to something more fulfilling. But someday had slipped quietly into never, and now she was a senior claims analyst, respected, yes, but doing work that felt like shuffling paper inside a never-ending machine. Occasionally, during lunch breaks, she would walk to the park across the street. She'd sit on a bench with her salad and watch street performers, musicians, painters, dancers, express themselves freely, their eyes alive with purpose. Sarah would feel an ache in her chest, a mix of admiration and envy. Family expectations. Mark, her husband, was a good man. He worked as a real estate agent, practical and even-tempered. They had met in their 20s, both ambitious and eager to build a life. Over time, their marriage had settled into a rhythm of mutual support but little passion. Mark valued stability above all else. When Sarah once mentioned wanting to take a pottery class on weekends, he had smiled but reminded her of the cost, saying, maybe later, when Ethan's college fund is in better shape. Ethan, now 16, was growing more independent each day. He spent most evenings in his room, either studying or chatting with friends online. Sarah knew it was normal for teenagers to pull away, but she sometimes felt like a supporting character in her own household, responsible for making sure everything ran smoothly but rarely at the center of the story. The unwelcome reflection. One Sunday afternoon, Sarah found herself cleaning out the hall closet. Between stacks of winter coats and a box of old holiday decorations, she discovered a dusty cardboard container labeled Sarah, college stuff. She carried it into the living room, brushed off the lid, and opened it. Inside were sketchbooks, charcoal pencils, and faded photographs of her 20-year-old self standing beside large canvases splashed with color. She had majored in fine arts back then, dreaming of becoming a professional painter. Sarah sat cross-legged on the carpet, flipping through page after page of her old sketches, faces full of emotion, landscapes rich with detail, quick studies of city streets. She could almost smell the turpentine, feel the texture of the canvas beneath her fingertips. For a moment, she was back in her tiny college apartment, painting until 2 a.m., music drifting from a radio, her heart swelling with the belief that art could change the way people saw the world. But as quickly as the memory came, reality intruded. She had given up that dream after graduation, choosing a safer career path when bills and student loans loomed large. The sketchbooks had been packed away when she married Mark, and she had never taken them out again, until now. The restless night. That evening, Sarah cooked dinner, chatted with Mark about his latest real estate listing, and asked Ethan about school. But the sketchbooks haunted her. After everyone went to bed, she stayed up late in the kitchen, flipping through them again. A question kept echoing in her mind: what happened to her? Not just the young woman with the sketchbook, but the fire in her eyes, the fearless way she once pursued beauty. Where had it gone? She thought of the years she had spent pushing that part of herself aside, convincing herself that creativity was a luxury for other people, people with fewer responsibilities, more money, or more talent. But now, she wondered if that was just an excuse. When she finally went to bed, she stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She realized she wasn't afraid of failing as an artist. She was afraid of living the rest of her life without ever trying. The silent decision. The next morning, Sarah went about her usual routine, but something had shifted. She lingered over her coffee, her mind turning over possibilities. What if she signed up for an evening art class? What if she picked up a paintbrush again, even just for herself? She didn't tell Mark. Not yet. She wanted to see if the idea would fade like so many others had. But deep down, she felt the first stirrings of change, a whisper that the cage door might be open, if she had the courage to step through. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt a flicker of anticipation for the days ahead. The following week passed in a strange haze for Sarah. On the surface, nothing had changed. She still drove to work, still processed claims, still made polite small talk with her colleagues. But in the quiet spaces between tasks, her mind wandered. She kept thinking about the box of sketchbooks, about the way her fingers had itched to hold a pencil again. It wasn't a loud urge, not yet. More like a faint murmur, a ripple beneath the surface of her thoughts. But the murmur was persistent, and it was growing. A lunchtime detour. On Wednesday, instead of eating lunch at her desk, Sarah decided to walk a few extra blocks past the park. She had no particular destination in mind, just a vague sense of wanting to breathe fresh air. Her steps slowed when she noticed a small storefront she'd never seen before, Harbor Art Supply. The window display was a cheerful jumble of sketchpads, paint tubes, and brushes of every size. A bright splash of color from a canvas on an easel seemed to call to her. She hesitated at the door. She hadn't been inside an art supply store in more than 2 decades. Would she even know what to buy? Would she look foolish, like someone pretending to be an artist? The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside. The scent of paper, wood, and faint oil paint hit her like a memory. The walls were lined with shelves of acrylics, oils, and watercolors. Racks of blank canvases stood like soldiers at attention. A young woman behind the counter smiled warmly. "First time here?" Sarah almost laughed. "First time in a very long time." "Well," the woman said, "welcome back." The purchase. Sarah wandered the aisles, her fingertips grazing the cool metal of paint tubes and the rough edges of stretched canvas. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but when she spotted a small, spiral-bound sketchbook with thick, cream-colored pages, she knew it was the right one. Next, she picked up a set of graphite pencils, nothing fancy, just enough to start. As she carried them to the counter, she felt an odd flutter in her chest. It was such a small act, but it felt like reclaiming a lost piece of herself. The woman at the register handed her the bag and said, "Enjoy. There's no wrong way to start again." Sarah smiled. "Thank you. I think I needed to hear that." The first lines. That evening, after dinner, Sarah waited until Mark had settled in front of the TV and Ethan had disappeared into his room. She went upstairs to the small guest bedroom, closed the door, and sat at the desk by the window. She opened the new sketchbook. For a long moment, she just stared at the blank page. It was intimidating, like an empty stage waiting for a performance. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the pencil. She started with something simple: the view from the window, the maple tree in the yard, the faint outline of a neighbor's porch light in the distance. The lines were rusty at first, hesitant. But after a few minutes, her breathing steadied. The rest of the world fell away. She was no longer the claims analyst or the responsible mother. She was just Sarah, drawing. By the time she put the pencil down, an hour had passed without her noticing. The drawing wasn't perfect, but it didn't matter. She felt lighter. A small secret. Over the next few nights, Sarah returned to the sketchbook. She drew in short bursts, 10 minutes before bed, 15 minutes while dinner was in the oven. She didn't tell anyone about it, not even Mark. It was her secret, a small flame she wanted to protect from the cold winds of practicality. She knew that if she mentioned it too soon, someone might dismiss it as just a hobby, and the fragile spark might go out. The unexpected invitation. One Friday afternoon, while browsing the company bulletin board in the break room, Sarah noticed a flyer pinned between announcements for yoga classes and a charity bake sale. Beginner's acrylic painting, 6-week evening course. No experience required. All materials provided. Her pulse quickened. The classes were held at a community art center only 15 minutes from her house, every Tuesday evening from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. She stood there staring at the flyer, torn between excitement and fear. What if she was terrible? What if everyone else was younger, more talented? But then she remembered the young woman at Harbor Arts saying, "There's no wrong way to start again." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Sarah signed up for the course online. When the confirmation email arrived, she felt a rush of adrenaline. For the first time in years, her calendar held something that was entirely for her. The growing whisper. The days leading up to the first class seemed to move both quickly and slowly, like the week before a long-awaited holiday. Sarah found herself smiling more, daydreaming during her commute. She imagined the smell of the paints, the feel of a brush in her hand. The whisper inside her had grown louder, no longer content to be background noise. It was becoming a voice, gentle but insistent, reminding her that life could be more than routines and responsibilities. And though she didn't know where this path might lead, she was ready to take the first real step. The Tuesday of Sarah's first painting class dawned like any other. The alarm at 6:15, nothing had changed. The soft piano melody, still drove to shuffle into the kitchen to brew coffee. Claims, still made but under the practiced efficiency of her movements, there was an unusual hum of energy. Between tasks, it was almost like the air itself carried a secret. She kept thinking about the box of sketchbooks, about the way her fingers had itched to hold a pencil again. She found herself glancing at the clock more than usual. It wasn't a loud urge, not yet. Her mind kept wandering away from faint forms and into visions of the surface of her thoughts. She told herself to focus, and her hands moved mechanically, a lunchtime detour. By the time 5 p.m. instead of eating lunch at her desk, she was nearly buzzing with anticipation. Sarah decided to walk a few extra blocks past the park. An unplanned delay. She had no particular destination in mind, on time, just a vague sense of wanting to breathe fresh air, and head to the community art center early. When she noticed a small storefront she'd never seen before, had other Harbor Art Supply. At 4:55 the window display was a cheerful jumble of shutting down her computer. Paint tube, her supervisor, and brushes of every size appeared at her desk. A bright splash of color Sarah, from a canvas on an easel seemed to call to her. Can you take a look at this claim? She hesitated at the door. It's flagged urgent, and I hadn't been inside an art supply store in more than 2 decades. She glanced at the file in his hand, then at the clock. Would she even know what to buy? Her heart sank. Would she look foolish? Sure, like someone pretending to be an artist, because that's what dependable Sarah does. The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside. It wasn't until 5:25 that she finally closed the file, and faint oil paint hit her like a memory. The traffic was worse than usual, were lined with and by the time she got home, oils, there was barely enough time to grab her bag and tell Mark she'd be out for the evening. Stood like soldiers at attention. "What's up tonight?" he asked. A young woman behind the real estate magazine on the couch. "First time here. Just something at the community center." Sarah almost laughed. She said vaguely. "First time in." She didn't want to get into it now. Not when she was already late. The woman said, "Welcome back." The first class. The purchase. She arrived at the art center with 3 minutes to spare, her fingertips grazing the cool metal of paint tubes. The room was spacious and bright, with large windows overlooking a small garden. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Folding tables were arranged in a semicircle, spiral-bound sketchbook with brushes, thick, cream-colored and jars of water. She knew it was the right one. About 10 people were already seated. She picked up a set of graphite pencils. They ranged from teenagers to retirees. As she carried them to the counter, a cheerful woman named Claire with silver hair pulled into a bun, welcomed Sarah warmly and directed her to an empty reclaiming seat. A lost piece of herself. Tonight, Claire began. The woman at the register handed her the bag and said, "No masterpieces required. There's no wrong way to start again. To make a mess." Sarah smiled. Sarah smiled. I think the words were exactly what she needed to hear. The first lines. As she dipped her brush into the paint and swept the first stroke Sarah waited until Mark had settled inside her TV and Ethan had disappeared into his room. The colors were vibrant under the overhead lights. She went upstairs to the small for the next 2 hours, time melted away, and sat at the desk by the window. Back to reality. She opened the new sketchbook. When class ended at 8:30, Sarah felt almost giddy. She just stared at the blank page. She carried her canvas. It was intimidating, of blues like an empty stage waiting to the car like it was something precious. Her hand trembled slightly as she stepped into the house. The spell began to break. She started with something simple. The kitchen sink was full of dirty dishes. The maple tree in the yard. The faint outline of a neighbor's across the dining table. Mark was on the phone with a client, pacing the living room. But after a few minutes, he mouthed when he saw her, holding up a finger to indicate the world fell away. She was no longer the claims analyst or the responsible mother. Then rolled up her sleeves and started rinsing dishes. She was just Sarah, drawing. By the time Mark hung up, she had nearly finished cleaning the kitchen. An hour had passed without her noticing. "How was your thing?" he asked. The drawing wasn't perfect, a glass of water, but it didn't matter. It was, she felt, lighter. She said softly. A small secret. Good. Over the next few nights, Ethan's science project is due next week. She drew in short bursts, to check in with him 10 minutes before bed. And just like that, while dinner was in the oven, the evening felt like a fragile bubble. She didn't tell anyone about it, not even Mark. The subtle resistance. It was her secret. Over the next few weeks, she wanted to protect from the cold winds of practicality. Each time, she knew that if she mentioned it with paint on her fingers, someone might dismiss it as just a hobby. But she also noticed subtle shifts in the household rhythm. The unexpected invitation. Mark didn't complain. But there was a faint edge in his voice when she reminded him to handle dinner on Tuesdays. Sarah noticed a flyer pinned between announcements for yoga classes and a charity bake sale. Or, "We never have dinner together anymore on Tuesdays." 6-week evening course. She tried to explain that it was just one evening required, that it made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. Her pulse quickened. But she could see that her family wasn't used to her carving out space for herself. Only 15 minutes from her house. A cracking shell. Every Tuesday evening from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Sarah sat in the driveway for a few extra minutes before going inside. Torn between excitement and fear. The house was lit warmly from within. What if she was terrible? Shadows moving across the curtains. What if everyone else was younger, more talented? She realized she was afraid. But then she remembered the young woman at Harbor Art might change things. There's no wrong way to start again. She had always been the glue in the family. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Sarah signed up for the course her own needs first, even when the confirmation email arrived, would everything else start to unravel? She felt a rush of adrenaline. But then she thought about the way she felt in class. Her calendar held something that was entirely for her. The sense of being wholly herself. The growing whisper. Maybe, the days leading up to the first class seemed to move both quickly and slowly, like the week before a long-awaited holiday. Opened the car door, Sarah found herself smiling more, daydreaming during her commute. She imagined the smell of the paints, the feel of a brush in her hand. The whisper inside her had grown louder, no longer content to be background noise. It was becoming a voice, gentle but insistent, reminding her that life could be more than routines and responsibilities. And though she didn't know where this path might lead, she was ready to take the first real step.